As population geneticists, we could spend the next decade talking about this 2% ghost lineage, but from a practical standpoint, it doesn't matter. This startling statement was made in 2016 by Princeton geneticist Joshua Akey. What he was referring to is the 2% ghost ancestor, representing an early Eurasian lineage first discovered in Papuans, but found in all Eurasians and their descendants. Now, a decade later, this 2% ghost lineage remains significant, yet the implications of this information have been kept quiet. Why do geneticists downplay early Eurasian 2% genetics? Not because it is small, but because of where it comes from. This means that all Eurasians and their lineages in the Americas, Australia, and North Africa carry ancestors from a ghost lineage. This is a massive deal. In fact, this 2% is definitive proof that a single pure Garden of Eden population, which supposedly decided to leave Africa just 50,000 years ago with a sudden spark of intelligence to wipe out all other human groups and spread across the globe, never existed. What this information tells us is that Eurasians are 200,000 years old. This is evolutionary dynamite, and this 2% is one of the strongest arguments against oversimplified models. Instead of simplicity, it supports repeated expansions, extinct branches, ghost populations, and complexity. This 2% early Eurasian lineage comes from the same metapopulation as the Skhul and Qafzeh early modern humans, but it is older and was located deeper within Arabia and the Persian Gulf basin. This 2% is not the same as the basal Eurasians, who are a much younger population. Because this early Eurasian lineage split off and was later reabsorbed, Africa lost many ancient variants through subsequent expansions, but the Proto-Eurasian population preserved some of them. Thus, some alleles in Eurasians and Papuans are older than modern African lineages. This 2% comes from a mysterious, unsequenced, and long-extinct early Homo sapiens population that lived roughly 200,000 to 120,000 years ago. The only way this ghost population remained genetically distinct for 100,000 years is if they lived in an isolated refugium outside of Africa, likely in Arabia or the Persian Gulf basin. This is not speculation, it is what genetics, archaeology, and paleoclimatology independently suggest when combined. This is why Eurasians possess alleles older than the out-of-Africa bottleneck, why certain Middle Eastern HLA types are unusually ancient, and why Papuans carry this 2% early Eurasian signal more strongly. Furthermore, it explains why there was interbreeding with Neanderthals 200,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, and again 50,000 years ago, or perhaps a nearly continuous interbreeding event from 250,000 to 50,000 years ago. Genetic data is not precise enough to know if these were separate events or one long love fest. We know these early Eurasians who bred with Neanderthals were not failed migrations because they contributed genes to later Eurasians. They did not migrate back to Africa only for their descendants to migrate out again. They lived in Eurasia for 200,000 years. This situation is politically and academically unsettling. This is why the 2% portion is buried in supplementary information and not widely discussed. It was a population cloud filled with admixture, backflow, bottlenecks, and extinctions. This is the reason why population geneticists say it doesn't matter. However, they are speaking from a technical standpoint, not an evolutionary one. According to textbooks, documentaries, and even Nobel Prize-winning geneticists, all modern humans descended from a single clean evolutionary event. A small group of anatomically modern humans left Africa approximately 70,000 years ago and replaced everyone else. This rigid out-of-Africa model has become so dominant politically, culturally, and scientifically that questioning it is treated almost like questioning evolution itself. Yet a secret lies deep within the genome of every Eurasian person on Earth. It is small, only 2%, but it is enough to shatter the idea that modern humans descend from a single homogeneous tribe. It is enough to reveal that the exit from Africa was not a single clean story. Rather, it was a complex tapestry of earlier expansions, failed dispersals, extinctions, bottlenecks, and readmixtures between populations living both inside and outside of Africa long ago. And scientists rarely talk about this, not because it is scientifically controversial or wrong, but because this 2% proves the traditional out-of-Africa model is deeply flawed. It adds complexity where simplicity once reigned. It suggests that the ancestors of modern humans were already hybrids of multiple ancient Homo sapiens lineages before they ever set foot in Eurasia. This 2% comes from early Homo sapiens who lived roughly 200,000 years ago in a corridor stretching into Arabia and the Persian Basin during temperate climate windows. They were not archaic humans. They were Homo sapiens, yet they were genetically distinct from the ancestors of both modern Africans and modern Eurasians. They represent an early expansion of modern humans into Eurasia, long before the famous migration roughly 70,000 years ago. This group later went extinct, ultimately leaving only a faint echo of its DNA in the population that became the founders of all people of Eurasian descent. That faint echo is the 2%, a genetic fossil of an extinct people. While geneticists quietly acknowledge this in technical discussions, it never reaches the public narrative because it complicates the tidy idea that humanity once had a single pure origin. To understand the significance of this ghost population, one must understand what happened in Arabia during the warm interglacial period roughly 100,000 to 120,000 years ago. In this window, the climate of the eastern Mediterranean was humid, rivers flowed through places that are now deserts, and the Sinai Peninsula was green enough to allow animals and humans to move freely between Africa and Eurasia. It was in this environment that modern humans of extraordinary anatomical sophistication appeared in the famous Skhul. Their remains are indisputably Homo sapiens. They possessed rounded skulls, delicate brow ridges, chins, and facial proportions that resemble modern humans far more than Neanderthals. Yet Skhul and Qafzeh are more than 50,000 years older than the classic out-of-Africa expansion. They belong to an early wave of modern humans who moved into Arabia during a wet climate window, but collapsed or retreated when glacial conditions returned. Archaeologically, they seem to represent a short-lived settlement, perhaps occurring a few thousand years before Neanderthals reoccupied the region. For decades, scientists assumed these early humans left no lineage. They were described as a failed dispersal. But the discovery of the 2% suggests something else, that these people, or populations closely related to them, did not entirely vanish. They left a genetic trace that later merged with the ancestors of all modern Eurasians. Modern genomic studies have confirmed that this 2% is not European, Asian, or African. It clearly diverges from African populations before the main out-of-Africa bottleneck. Yet it is closer to Homo sapiens than to Neanderthals or Denisovans. The most likely origin is a population living outside Africa, but before the massive expansion of modern humans into Eurasia. Imagine a chain of communities spread across Arabia during humid phases. They hunted gazelle and ibex. They gathered shellfish and used Lavalas points mounted on wooden shafts. They processed ochre. They made symbolic beads. They lived in small groups, small enough to succumb to long-term population pressure, but big enough to leave their genetic mark. These people were modern humans in every sense but one. They lived tens of thousands of years before the ancestors of today's Europeans, Asians, and Papuans. When the climate dried and deserts expanded, these early humans either retreated to Africa or dwindled in Arabia, but not before a small amount of their DNA flowed back into populations living along the Red Sea and Nile corridor. Then came the great bottleneck, approximately 70,000 years ago, the moment when a small, isolated group of modern humans formed the population that would eventually colonize the entire world. This founder population was not genetically pure or homogeneous. It already contained multiple ancient signals, including the 2% ghost lineage from these early Arabian or Red Sea populations. This means that even before Neanderthals made their 2% contribution, even before humans walked into Arabia in the final wave, the ancestors of all Eurasians were already hybrids of deeply diverged Homo sapiens lineages. This is the part scientists don't like to discuss.